Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In this captivating African folktale, Amina and Kofi receive a mysterious gift, a child named Rosemary, brought to them on a stormy night by an eerie visitor. But Rosemary is no ordinary child. Strange occurrences follow her arrival as darkness, spirits, and a deadly curse begin to unravel their peaceful lives. As the villagers turn against them, and the spirits demand a sacrifice, Amina must make an impossible choice. Can a mother's love defeat the spirit's powerful grip, or will the darkness consume them all? Watch this unforgettable tale of courage, love, and the supernatural unfold. In the small village of Umudike, surrounded by dense forests and hidden by mist, there lived a woman named Amina. She was known for her beauty and kindness, but also for her deep sadness. Amina had longed for a child for many years, but her prayers had gone unanswered. She lived with her husband, Kofi, a farmer who worked hard in the fields from dawn till dusk. The people of Umudike whispered about them, saying they were cursed because they had no children. One stormy night, the strange visitor came to their home. It was an old woman, dressed in a dark cloak, her face hidden in shadows. She knocked on their door, and when Amina opened it, the woman handed her a small basket. Inside was a baby girl wrapped in a soft, red cloth. The old woman spoke in a voice that was both soothing and frightening. "Her name is Rosemary," the woman said. "She is yours now, but beware, she is not like other children. Keep her safe, for darkness follows her." Before Amina could ask anything, the old woman disappeared into the stormy night, leaving only the sound of the wind howling through the trees. Amina and Kofi were overjoyed. They didn't question where the baby came from or why she was given to them. They simply accepted her as a gift from the spirits. But as they held Rosemary, they noticed something strange. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and when she looked at them, it felt as if she could see into their souls. As the rain poured down outside, Amina and Kofi promised to love and protect Rosemary. But deep in their hearts, a cold fear began to grow, like a shadow creeping across their lives. As Rosemary grew, strange things started happening in Umudike. The village, once peaceful and quiet, began to feel different. The animals in the fields became restless, the crops started wilting, and the air grew colder, even on the hottest days. The villagers began to whisper again, this time about the baby with the dark eyes. Rosemary was unlike any other child. She rarely cried, and when she did, it was a soft, eerie sound that sent shivers down Amina's spine. She seemed to know things that no child her age should know. One day, when she was barely a year old, Amina found her drawing strange symbols in the dirt outside their home. The symbols were unlike anything Amina had ever seen, and when she asked Rosemary what they were, the child simply smiled. "They are from the other side," Rosemary said, her voice calm and cold. "They watch us from the shadows." Amina's heart raced. What did her daughter mean? She didn't know, but a deep fear settled inside her. She tried to ignore it, telling herself that Rosemary was just an imaginative child. But the feeling of unease grew stronger each day. The villagers noticed the change in Rosemary too. They began avoiding her and her parents. Children who once played near their home now ran away when they saw Rosemary. Some villagers even claimed to see dark figures following Rosemary when she walked through the village. Kofi tried to calm Amina's fears, telling her that the villagers were just superstitious. But even he couldn't deny that something was different about their daughter. And as Rosemary continued to grow, the darkness around her seemed to grow as well. When Rosemary turned 5, the nightmares began. Amina and Kofi would hear her screaming in the middle of the night. They would rush to her room, only to find her sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide open but unseeing, as if she were in a trance. She would mumble strange words that neither Amina nor Kofi could understand. One night, Amina decided to stay awake to watch over her daughter. As she sat by Rosemary's bed, the room grew colder. The shadows in the corners seemed to move, as if they were alive. Suddenly, Rosemary began to speak in a voice that wasn't her own. It was deep and menacing, sending chills down Amina's spine. "They are coming," Rosemary whispered. "They want me back." Amina tried to wake Rosemary, but the child's eyes remained fixed on something unseen. Terrified, Amina called out to Kofi, who rushed into the room. But by the time he arrived, Rosemary had fallen back asleep, her face peaceful as if nothing had happened. The next morning, when Amina asked Rosemary about the nightmare, the girl simply smiled and said, "They were just playing with me, Mama." Amina's fear grew with each passing night. The nightmares became more frequent, and the darkness around their home seemed to deepen. Amina tried to seek help from the village priest, but he refused to come near their home. He warned Amina that some things were better left alone, and that she should pray for protection. But no matter how much Amina prayed, the darkness continued to grow. And with it, a terrible suspicion began to form in her mind: what if Rosemary wasn't just having nightmares? What if something was trying to take her back to wherever she came from? One evening, as the sun was setting, Amina noticed a figure standing at the edge of the forest near their home. It was a tall man, dressed in a long, dark robe. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but Amina could feel his eyes on her, watching her every move. She called out to Kofi, who quickly grabbed his machete and rushed outside. But when they reached the spot where the man had been standing, he was gone. All that remained was a strange symbol carved into the ground, the same symbol Rosemary had drawn when she was younger. Amina's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that this man was connected to Rosemary's strange behavior. But who was he, and what did he want with their daughter? That night, Amina couldn't sleep. She sat by Rosemary's bed, holding her hand and praying for protection. As she sat in the dark, she heard a faint whispering coming from the corners of the room. The shadows seemed to shift and move, and Amina felt a presence in the room, watching them. Suddenly, Rosemary sat up in bed, her eyes wide open. "He's here," she whispered. "He's coming for me." Amina's blood ran cold. She looked around the room, but saw nothing. Yet she could feel the presence growing stronger, filling the room with a suffocating darkness. She held Rosemary close, refusing to let go, even as the shadows closed in around them. The next morning, Amina and Kofi decided that they couldn't stay in Umudike any longer. They needed to take Rosemary far away, somewhere the darkness couldn't follow. But as they prepared to leave, they realized that the darkness wasn't just in their home. It was in Rosemary herself. As Amina and Kofi made plans to leave the village, they sought advice from an elder named Baba Ojo, who was known for his wisdom and knowledge of ancient traditions. Baba Ojo listened to their story with a grave expression, his eyes narrowing as they described Rosemary's strange behavior. After a long silence, Baba Ojo spoke. "The child you have is not an ordinary child. She was given to you for a reason, but that reason is not a blessing. It is a curse." Amina's heart sank. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Baba Ojo leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "There are spirits in this world that hunger for souls. They can take many forms, but they often choose children because they are pure and innocent. Rosemary is a vessel for such a spirit. That is why the darkness follows her." Kofi's face turned pale. What can we do? How do we protect her? Baba Ojo shook his head. You cannot protect her. The spirit is already inside her. It is only a matter of time before it takes full control. When that happens, the darkness will consume her and those around her. Amina felt tears welling up in her eyes. She couldn't bear the thought of losing her daughter to such a fate. There must be something we can do, she pleaded. Baba Ojo sighed. There is one way, but it is dangerous. You must take her to the sacred grove deep in the forest. There you may be able to confront the spirit and drive it out. But be warned, the journey is perilous, and the spirit will not leave without a fight. Amina and Kofi exchanged worried glances. The thought of venturing into the dark forest terrified them, but they knew they had no choice. They had to save Rosemary, no matter the cost. With heavy hearts, they agreed to follow Baba Ojo's advice. The next morning, they set out on the journey, unaware of the horrors that awaited them in the depths of the forest. The morning air was thick with the scent of wet earth as Amina and Kofi set off with Rosemary towards the sacred grove. The forest loomed ahead of them like a wall of shadow, its trees gnarled and ancient. Every step they took seemed to echo through the silence, as if the forest itself was listening, waiting for them to make a mistake. Rosemary walked between her parents, her small hand clutching Amina's tightly. She was quiet, her dark eyes scanning the trees as if she could see things that others couldn't. Amina tried to stay calm, but the fear gnawed at her insides like a relentless beast. She kept remembering Baba Ojo's warning, this journey was perilous, and they were facing something far more dangerous than they could comprehend. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the light began to fade. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, and Amina felt a chill crawl up her spine. She glanced at Kofi, who was gripping his machete so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Hours passed, and the forest seemed endless. The path became harder to follow, overgrown with twisted roots and thorns. Amina noticed that the animals, which should have been bustling with life, were eerily absent. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was as if all living things had abandoned this place. Suddenly, Rosemary stopped walking. She stared ahead, her eyes wide with fear. "They are here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Amina and Kofi froze. They looked around, but saw nothing. The forest was silent, but the silence was heavy, oppressive, like a weight pressing down on them. Then, without warning, the shadows around them began to move. Dark shapes emerged from the trees, figures cloaked in black, their faces hidden. Amina's heart pounded in her chest as the figures surrounded them. There were dozens of them, silent and still, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Kofi raised his machete, but before he could swing it, a voice echoed through the trees, a deep, resonant voice that sent shivers down their spines. "Why have you come here?" the voice boomed. Rosemary stepped forward, her eyes meeting the unseen speakers. "We are here to free me," she said, her voice stronger than Amina had ever heard it. The figures remained silent, but the air grew colder, the darkness thicker. Amina could feel the malevolent energy swirling around them, closing in. She knew they were in grave danger, but there was no turning back now. They had to face whatever lay ahead, or risk losing Rosemary forever. The voice from the shadows spoke again, this time closer, as if it was whispering directly into their ears. "You seek to defy the will of the spirits. This child is not yours to save." Amina felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced at Kofi, who looked just as terrified as she felt. They were surrounded by beings they didn't understand, in a place where the laws of the natural world didn't seem to apply. But they couldn't let fear stop them. They had come too far to turn back now. Rosemary, however, stood her ground. "I don't belong to you," she said, her voice steady. "I was given to them. They are my parents. The dark figures began to move, slowly circling the family. Amina felt the ground beneath her feet tremble, as if the very earth was reacting to the presence of these spirits. The air was thick with tension, and every breath felt like it was laced with ice. "You were given to them, but you do not belong with them," the voice said, more insistent now. "You are a child of the dark, a vessel for the spirit that resides within you. If you stay with these mortals, you will bring nothing but suffering to them." Amina's heart ached at the words. Was it true? Was Rosemary truly destined to bring them misery? She looked at her daughter, who was staring defiantly into the darkness, her small form dwarfed by the shadows around her. Amina wanted to protect her, to shield her from whatever evil was trying to claim her, but she didn't know how. Kofi tightened his grip on the machete, stepping forward to stand beside Rosemary. "She is our daughter," he said, his voice firm. "We will protect her, no matter what." The ground trembled again, more violently this time, and the shadows seemed to close in around them. Amina felt her courage waver. The spirits were powerful, and they were far from the safety of the village. But they had no choice but to fight. They couldn't let Rosemary be taken by the darkness. The voice in the shadows grew cold, almost angry. "You have been warned. If you choose to defy us, you will face the consequences. The darkness within her will consume her, and you will be powerless to stop it." As the words echoed through the trees, the dark figures began to retreat, slowly dissolving into the shadows. The forest grew silent once more, but the threat lingered in the air like a curse. Amina knew that the danger was far from over. The spirits had warned them, but they hadn't given up. They were still watching, waiting for the moment to strike. The journey through the forest became even more treacherous after the encounter with the spirits. The path was nearly impossible to follow, with dense undergrowth and twisted vines making every step a challenge. The sun, hidden by thick clouds, barely provided enough light to see by, and the cold seemed to seep into their very bones. As night began to fall, the forest took on an even more sinister atmosphere. The trees cast long, twisted shadows, and the wind whispered through the leaves like the voices of the dead. Amina and Kofi pressed on, determined to reach the sacred grove, but their progress was slow, and the forest seemed to close in around them. Suddenly, Rosemary stopped walking. She looked up at the sky, her eyes wide with fear. Amina followed her gaze and gasped. The moon had risen, but it wasn't the pale orb she was used to seeing. It was a deep, blood-red color, casting an eerie light over the forest. The sight of it filled Amina with a sense of dread. She had heard stories of the blood moon, a sign of impending doom, but she had never believed them until now. "The blood moon," Kofi whispered, his voice trembling. "It's a sign. The spirits are growing stronger." Rosemary didn't say anything, but her eyes were fixed on the moon, as if she was in a trance. Amina reached out to touch her shoulder, but Rosemary pulled away, her expression blank and distant. "They are coming for me," Rosemary said softly. "They won't stop until they have me." Amina felt a surge of panic. The spirits were closing in, and the blood moon was a warning, a sign that time was running out. They had to reach the sacred grove before it was too late, but the path was long and treacherous, and the darkness was growing stronger with each passing moment. Kofi took Amina's hand, his grip firm. "We have to keep moving," he said. "We can't stop now." But as they continued their journey, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to move with them, growing darker and more oppressive with each step. The blood moon hung in the sky like a malevolent eye, watching their every move. As they walked, the forest grew quieter. The only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot and the soft rustling of the wind. But then, out of the silence, came a low, rumbling growl. Amina froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around, but saw nothing, just the trees and the shadows. But the growl came again, louder this time, and Amina knew they were not alone. Something was out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. The growl grew louder, reverberating through the trees like thunder. Amina's heart raced as she gripped Rosemary's hand tightly. The fear in her chest was nearly paralyzing, but she knew they had to keep moving. The shadows around them seemed to shift and writhe, as if something monstrous was hiding just out of sight. Kofi raised his machete, his eyes scanning the dark forest. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." But even as he spoke, the shadows moved again. A shape emerged from the darkness, large, hulking, and covered in thick, matted fur. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow in the light of the blood moon, and its fangs gleamed as it snarled. It was a beast like nothing Amina had ever seen before, the creature of nightmares. Rosemary's grip on Amina's hand tightened, and Amina could feel the fear radiating from her daughter. The beast took a step closer, its growl deepening, its massive paws crushing the undergrowth beneath it. Amina's mind raced, trying to think of a way to protect her family, but the beast was enormous, and it radiated a dark power that was almost suffocating. Kofi stepped forward, placing himself between the beast and his family. He swung his machete. Kofi swung his machete with all his strength, the blade glinting in the eerie red light of the blood moon. But as it connected with the beast, the weapon shattered like glass against its thick hide. The force of the impact sent Kofi stumbling backward, his hands trembling as he stared at the broken blade in disbelief. The beast's eyes locked onto Kofi, and with a roar that shook the trees, it lunged. Kofi barely had time to react as the creature's massive claws raked across his chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Blood poured from the deep wounds, staining the forest floor. Amina screamed, her voice filled with terror and desperation. She rushed to Kofi's side, but the beast was relentless. It loomed over them, its hot breath filling the air with the stench of decay. Amina knew they had no chance against this monstrous creature. It was too powerful, too filled with the dark energy of the forest. But then, something changed. Rosemary, who had been standing frozen in fear, suddenly stepped forward. Her dark eyes seemed to glow with an inner light, and the air around her shimmered with a strange energy. The beast hesitated, its growl faltering as it looked at the small girl standing before it. "Stop," Rosemary commanded, her voice resonating with an unnatural authority. "You will not harm them." The beast's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it looked as if it would ignore her command. But then, slowly, it backed away, its massive body retreating into the shadows. The darkness that had surrounded them seemed to waver, as if unsure of what to do. Amina stared at Rosemary in shock. Her daughter's voice had been nothing like she had ever heard before, deep, powerful, almost otherworldly. It was as if the spirit inside Rosemary had taken control, protecting them from the beast. But as the creature disappeared into the night, Rosemary collapsed to the ground, her small body shaking with exhaustion. Amina rushed to her side, cradling her in her arms. "Rosemary, what did you do?" she whispered, her voice filled with both fear and awe. Rosemary looked up at her, her eyes once again the dark, innocent eyes of a child. "I made it go away," she said softly, before slipping into unconsciousness. Amina's heart pounded as she held her daughter close. The darkness had retreated for now, but she knew it wasn't over. Whatever power Rosemary had tapped into, it was only a temporary reprieve. The spirits of the forest were still out there, waiting, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim what they believed was theirs. With Kofi injured and Rosemary unconscious, Amina knew they had to move quickly. The beast had been driven away, but the forest still felt alive with malevolent energy, and the blood moon hung ominously overhead. Amina fashioned a makeshift bandage for Kofi's wounds, using strips of cloth torn from her own clothing. It was a temporary solution, but they couldn't stay in the open any longer. "Can you walk?" Amina asked Kofi, her voice trembling with concern. Kofi winced as he tried to sit up, but nodded. "We have to reach the sacred grove," he said through gritted teeth. "It's our only hope." Amina lifted Rosemary into her arms, cradling the small girl against her chest. The weight of her daughter was light, but the burden she carried felt heavier than anything Amina had ever known. They continued their journey through the forest, moving as quickly as they could despite Kofi's injuries. The path grew darker and narrower, the trees closing in around them. Amina could feel the presence of the spirits, their cold gaze watching her every move. The forest was a living entity, a maze of shadows and whispers that seemed to stretch on endlessly. Hours passed, and just when Amina thought they couldn't go any further, they reached a small clearing. The trees parted to reveal a circle of ancient stones, their surfaces etched with strange, glowing symbols. In the center of the circle was a stone altar, weathered by time and covered in moss. "This is it," Kofi whispered, his voice filled with both relief and fear. "The sacred grove." But as they approached the altar, a voice echoed through the clearing, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was deep, resonant, and filled with a cold, dark power. "You should not have come here," the voice said, its tone dripping with malice. Amina's heart raced as she looked around, trying to find the source of the voice. But there was no one there, only the stones, the trees, and the shadows. "We have come to free our daughter," Amina called out, her voice trembling. "We will not let you take her." The voice laughed, a sound that chilled Amina to the bone. "You cannot free her. She belongs to us. The moment she was born, her fate was sealed. You are fools to think you can defy the will of the spirits." Kofi struggled to his feet, his eyes burning with determination. "We will fight you," he said, his voice firm. "We will do whatever it takes to save her." The voice grew colder and more menacing. "You will not fight us. You will sacrifice yourselves to us, or she will be lost forever." Amina's blood ran cold. The spirits were demanding a sacrifice, and they would not leave until they got what they wanted. The darkness in the forest was growing stronger, closing in around them like a suffocating fog. Amina could feel its weight pressing down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. But she would not give up. She would not let the spirits take her daughter without a fight. The voice in the grove grew louder, reverberating through the ancient stones and echoing in Amina's mind. She felt as if her thoughts were being pulled apart, torn by the sinister energy that filled the air. Kofi, despite his injuries, stood beside her, his face pale but determined. "You must decide," the voice hissed. "A life for a life. Her freedom for your sacrifice." Amina's heart pounded as she looked at the altar, the cold stone bathed in the eerie glow of the symbols. The realization of what the spirits demanded hit her like a blow. They wanted her and Kofi to offer their lives in exchange for Rosemary's freedom. It was a cruel bargain, but there seemed to be no other way. Kofi turned to Amina, his eyes filled with love and sorrow. "Amina, we must do this for her. She's our daughter, and she deserves a chance to live." Tears welled up in Amina's eyes. She knew he was right, but the thought of leaving Rosemary alone in this world, without them, was unbearable. The spirits had trapped them in a situation with no good choices, and every instinct in Amina's body screamed against giving in to their demands. But Rosemary stood in her arms, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at Amina with a clarity that belied her young age, as if she understood the gravity of what was happening. "Mama, Papa," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I don't want you to go." Amina's heart broke at the words. She had always known that a mother's love was strong, but she had never imagined it would be tested in this way. She knelt by the altar, placing Rosemary gently on the stone, her hands shaking with emotion. But as she did, a new thought pierced through the fog of fear and despair. What if the spirits were lying? What if there was another way to save Rosemary, one that didn't involve sacrificing themselves? The thought was a spark of hope in the darkness, then Amina clung to it with all her strength. "Why should we trust you? Amina called out to the unseen spirits, her voice firm despite her fear. How do we know you won't take her anyway, even if we sacrifice ourselves? The voice paused, as if considering her words. The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive, until finally, the voice spoke again, this time softer, more calculating. There is another way, it said, the words dripping with temptation. A way to keep your lives and free the child. But it requires a different sacrifice. A sacrifice of the soul. Amina's breath caught in her throat. She didn't understand what the voice meant, but she knew it couldn't be good. The spirits were playing with them, twisting their minds and emotions to get what they wanted. But she had no choice but to listen. What do you mean? Kofi asked, his voice filled with tension. The voice chuckled, a low, sinister sound. One of you must give up your soul to us. In doing so, you will remain alive, but your essence, your very being, will belong to us for eternity. The child will be free, but the one who sacrifices their soul will never be the same. The darkness around them seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as the spirits awaited their decision. Amina and Kofi exchanged a desperate look, knowing that whatever choice they made, it would change their lives forever. Kofi and Amina stood in the sacred grove, the weight of the spirit's offer pressing down on them. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The darkness around them seemed to pulse, waiting for their decision. Kofi stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. I will do it, he said, his voice steady. I will give my soul to save Rosemary. Amina's heart latched at his words. No, Kofi, you can't. We need to find another way. Kofi shook his head. Amina, I have to do this. Our daughter deserves a chance to live a normal life, free from this darkness. If sacrificing my soul is what it takes, then so be it. Tears streamed down Amina's face as she clutched Kofi's hand. She wanted to protest, to beg him to reconsider, but deep down, she knew he was right. They were out of options, and time was running out. The voice in the shadows laughed, a low, malevolent sound that sent shivers down their spines. Very well, it said. The bargain is sealed. Your soul will belong to us, and in exchange, the child will be freed. Kofi closed his eyes, bracing himself for what was to come. Amina watched in horror as the darkness around them seemed to gather, coalescing into a swirling vortex of shadows. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath them trembled. Suddenly, the shadows lunged at Kofi, wrapping around him like tendrils of smoke. He gasped, his eyes wide with pain as the darkness seeped into him, consuming him from the inside out. Amina screamed, but there was nothing she could do. The spirits were taking him, just as they had promised. Kofi's body convulsed as the darkness filled him, and for a moment, Amina feared he would be lost forever. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness receded. Kofi collapsed to the ground, his body limp and lifeless. Amina rushed to his side, her heart pounding in her chest. Kofi! Kofi, wake up, she cried, shaking him desperately. For a moment, there was no response. But then, slowly, Kofi's eyes fluttered open. Amina let out a sob of relief, but her joy was short-lived. The man who looked back at her was not the same. His eyes, once filled with warmth and love, were now cold and empty, like two black voids. The sacrifice is complete, the voice whispered, echoing through the grove. He is ours now. Amina's heart shattered as she realized the truth. Kofi's body was still alive, but his soul was gone, taken by the spirits. He was a hollow shell of the man she had once known, and there was nothing she could do to bring him back. But as she wept over her husband, Rosemary stood on the altar. The darkness that had surrounded her was gone, replaced by a soft, golden light. Amina looked up, hope blooming in her chest. The spirits had kept their promise, Rosemary was free. But at what cost? Rosemary is free, but at what cost? Join us on the next episode to find out.